Welcome back to the Sensible SENCO series, and today it's the Sensible SENCOs SEN summary as of the 8th of April 2020. So it's the Easter break now for most schools, and although many of them remain open for key workers, there isn't quite the same pressure around trying to deliver a remote curriculum whilst juggling the regular day-to-day job under rather strange circumstances. The delivery of this remote curriculum has actually confused me slightly. The government made it clear that the national curriculum was suspended and that schools would stay open as childcare facilities for key workers, critical workers. They cancelled the exams and they cancelled assessments, and they said there wasn't going to be any data collection around that. Yet as teachers, many of us have defaulted to the work pack and online lessons, along with trying to set up virtual classrooms and delivering teaching. I have some quite grave concerns about this. Many children, including those in more affluent families, don't necessarily have the access to technology to be able to sit through these lessons. As a mum of 4, 2 of which are directly affected by these closures, I certainly don't have enough devices to pass around them for a lesson-by-lesson approach. And I'm still working full-time. I work from home anyway, but that means I can't check on them every 15 minutes to make sure that they've moved on to the next questions in the work pack that I've had to print out. Amazon are delivering more paper and ink tomorrow. As usual, it goes back to the guidance we're being given and enough ambiguity within that for everyone to take their own interpretation. I accept that my interpretation might be entirely incorrect. Another case of damned if you do and damned if you don't. And of course, at the end of all of this, it'll be the schools who end up taking the blame. Anyway, over the last 2 weeks of the school closures, there's been lots of new information documents flying around, and they're all the official ones. I had a really interesting conversation with a couple of other SEN consultants the other day, and we are actually really worried about the information which isn't official and is going out to schools and families. Advice on how to teach their child, or statements telling schools that they don't need to undertake statutory reviews of EHCPs, or that the timeline has been suspended. To be fair, it's the Facebook groups that seem to be generating most of this false information, whereas on Twitter it's quickly shot or shut down. I'm actually really careful to make sure that I give my answers along with a credible source, so something from the DfE or the actual guidance from a solicitor if necessary. Unless, of course, I'm expressing my own opinion, in which case I generally make that obvious as well. Anyway, just in case you missed it or you want to be able to find it quickly, here's a summary of the information that's come out recently. First of all, we start with the DfE and government updates. Theirs is the guidance we need to follow, including their must and should statements. I'll pop a website on screen in a moment that has all the relevant documents hyperlinked on one page, and of course they get updated. You can also access that link from my own website, which is www.sendcosolutions.co.uk, under the COVID-19 blog. There's a main document that everyone must have seen by now, which is called School Closures. We'll pop a link on the screen and in the description box. This is the main document, like I said, and it's all about school closures, and has been updated several times since it was first published on the 22nd of March. If you read nothing else, make sure you stay on top of this guide. So use your favourites button on your browser and check in every 3, 4, 5 days for any changes. Alternatively, you can always sign up for the DfE updates and get a notification as soon as they're released. That's usually between 10 and 12 o'clock if it's an update, or between 11 PM and 1 AM if it's a new document and has massive changes to implement by 9 AM. Or is that just a coincidence? Anyway, on the 7th of April, they updated the sections in there on funding, holidays and practicalities. And I'll come back to that in a moment because the funding document is actually a standalone document and interesting. The 3rd of April, they added information about safeguarding and updated information around workforce and critical workers. And again, there's a standalone document that goes with it, but the general summary as a whole is within here. And if you're a safeguarding lead, it's definitely better to read the full document. 31st of March, they added information about the workforce, hubs and links to other guidance, and the 27th of March, they updated questions on how are vulnerable children defined and is it compulsory for them to send them, will they be penalised, all that kind of thing. So many of the other documents that are on the site actually reference the different sections within the main document, and they provide further clarity and occasionally contradiction. It wouldn't be a DFE document if it didn't contradict itself. Not all of them are directly related to SEN, but they are useful to be aware of. There's a fascinating document on there called Maintaining Educational Provision, and it was second on the list at the time of filming. It was issued on the 19th of March, the day after they said we're going to close schools on the 20th. I say it's fascinating because you would assume that this document might actually advise us what educational provision should look like whilst being maintained, clue being in the title. Instead, it defines key workers and says if a child can be kept safely at home, that's where they should be. Talk about confusing. Like I said, there's a number of different documents that main document kind of refers to. So we've got things about guidance around the novel coronavirus COVID-19. Basically, it's a document that tells you how to wash your hands. We've got one on implementing social distancing in schools and other settings, which I'm sure was written by somebody who hasn't been in a school for quite a long time. Guidance on vulnerable children, which is actually a series of frequently asked questions. So this came out a couple of days into the closures where there was a little bit of ambiguity about, what actually is a vulnerable child, and does that mean I have to have all of my EHCP students in school? They actually issued further guidance around that. There's specific information for early years settings, and there's a safeguarding document as well. There's also one around free school meals, and this was updated on the 31st of March to include the voucher scheme, and was then updated on the 7th of April after they managed to contradict themselves at the weekend to talk about Easter provision. I'm not going to comment on Edenred, or however you pronounce that name, who seemed not to realise how many vouchers they were going to need to process. I'm pretty sure a quick Google search would have told them how many schools and how many pupils were eligible for free school meal vouchers across the whole of the country before they tendered for that contract. It seems like they didn't bother doing their research though. There's a document called Exceptional Funding. So this is the funding that's available to schools for the exceptional costs related to COVID-19. These fall under three very specific headings, and a school is not allowed to carry a surplus budget over to the next academic year if they want to apply for any of this exceptional funding. The values are capped. I was actually quite angry at this document when it was released yesterday, the 7th of April. It's more than 2 weeks since the schools closed, and in the original statement and the documentation that the government released, they said that any additional expenditure related to the COVID-19 closures would be covered. I know of schools that went out and bought tablets and dongles for their students so they could have internet access. One school who ordered a full set of CGP guides for their Year 10 students so that they could study their maths, English, science, history, geography, whatever it is, and not fall behind with those studies. And they won't have to photocopy it all, obviously. And several who have engaged one-to-one tutors or speech and language therapist support to ensure that the needs of their SEN students are being met. I'm not going to cover EHCPs in this bit because they're covered by the local authority. But this funding document, when it came out yesterday, doesn't actually allow for any of those costs to be recouped. Only those related to the premises being opened, and that's above the cost it would normally have cost you to open up the school. Any additional cleaning, so for example a deep clean or something, and any costs incurred in providing free school meals prior to the voucher system being introduced. I was so angry yesterday, I pinged an email across to the DFE and said, right, okay, what about all these scenarios as well? And basically got back a response from them. I was actually surprised I got a response, to be fair, but I did get a response back from them saying, no, it doesn't fit under any one of those headings, but if I want to, I can take it further to the ESFA, which is the Education Skills and Funding Agency. I'm not a school, so I actually can't take it any further, and they're not going to answer to me as an SEN consultant, but feel free to go and challenge that one yourselves. Anyway, I was also surprised at those caps or limits and that the school were expected to use any of their savings, if you like. So a school who's been a little bit savvy and was perhaps expecting to carry forward a couple of £1,000 into the next financial year, which usually starts in April, so put it to one side, perhaps wanted to buy new play equipment or something. They're now expected to spend that on the COVID-19 response before applying for any funding grant. Now, to some extent, that's actually fair, but if the school had commissioned their new play equipment, let's say in January or February, or even the day before this was all announced, they would have been able to apply for that grant without any penalty, which just seems a little unfair, really. The caps, £25,000 for the smallest schools and £75,000 for the largest, do however seem quite reasonable. Although I am actually struggling to see how, under the three categories they've given, that a school would actually end up spending that amount of money. Interestingly, staffing is not one of the categories under which the exceptional funding can be applied. If staffing is an issue, then the school is expected to speak with their regional schools commissioner and ask them for advice. Reading between the lines, that basically means they'll go to the local authority and ask staff to be redeployed to other establishments. That is my opinion, by the way. SEN, EHCP and top-up funding and the provision for students with an EHCP remains the remit of the local authority. There were 3 paragraphs in that funding document that I think were the really key ones for SENCOs. And I'm going to read those 3 paragraphs now. I promise they're quite short. Local authorities will continue to receive their high needs budgets and should continue to pay top-up and other high needs funding to schools. So that's really important if they suddenly say, well, no, we're not paying you for the summer term because the kids aren't in. Actually, this document says they must pay it to you. This will ensure that the employment and payment of staff supporting pupils with special educational needs and disabilities can continue. Similarly, where schools pay top-up or funding for pupils attending alternative provision or pay for other SEND or AP services, they expect the payments to continue so that the teachers and other staff can be paid in accordance with their existing employment contracts. And the 3rd paragraph, the additional funding set out in this guidance is not intended to cover any additional costs relating to changes in SEND provision organised by local authorities for individual children and young people with education, health and care plans. So if they've got an EHCP and the local authority says to you, right, go and commission whatever service it is not for the school to have to pay that, because you cannot claim that funding back, although you could write it off against the funding the local authority is giving you, but it shouldn't be coming from any of your other budgets, basically. The local authority is being expected to sort that out and pay for it. Incidentally, if you need an online speech and therapy session, I spoke with Martha Curry, the director of Mabel Therapy, earlier today, and they still have some availability. Drop me an email and I'll put you in touch with each other. In the meantime, I'm bending her arm to do a video with me on speech and language provision. Few of you will realise that we had a bit of a competition going over on Twitter and Facebook. If you don't follow us on Twitter, we are at SENDCO Solutions, and on Facebook we have our own group, Sensible SENCO and SENCO Solutions. And we had a competition to try and name our young lady over here. And the winner of that was Moorbridge School, which is a pupil referral unit up in Tyne and Wear, and we will be sending them their prizes as soon as we find a post office that's open. There aren't any open around us at the moment, ironically. And her name is Violet. While I'm here, I might as well tell you that in May we are having Maths May. So I have approached lots and lots of maths companies and asked them for their resources, and we're going to have a whole month of videos around SEN maths resources. That's online ones, books, actual physical resources that you can use. And I've also been talking with a speech and language therapist, bending her arm to come and chat with you about speech and language therapy. And some of you will have seen on Twitter earlier today that I've bent the arm of Matt Pinkett, who is co-author of Boys Don't Try, along with Mark Roberts, to chat with me about his book, which I love. And the other thing that was on Twitter earlier today is, of course, the webinar series, which I am co-hosting with Natalie Packer and David Bartram, Joe Johnson, and the one and only Carol Vorderman. Wow, that's going to be fun. The interesting document, I suppose, for secondary schools was around Ofqual and exams, and that was the guidance that was aiming to answer the questions in relation to the cancellation of GCSEs, AS and A-levels due to the coronavirus outbreak. And it was updated on the 3rd of April when they actually put out that Ofqual information and said how they're going to gather the results for GCSEs and for A-levels. I'm not going to address that in this video because I think it's a video in its own right, and to be fair, it's not specifically relevant to SEN as such. There are also other guides on that site, so we've got specific information for further education providers, what to do with apprentices, those who have residential settings, and some travel advice on there as well, which is actually quite old now because it was released prior to the school's closing. Some information for social care services around supporting those students with EHCPs or the vulnerable students who we were asked to keep in school, so those who are looked after perhaps. There's information for NQTs and for initial teacher training and ensuring that they can access their qualifications at the end of this. There's information for parents and carers, which, to be fair, kind of sometimes contradicts what it says in the guidance that the schools are given. No big surprise there, really. But if you actually read both documents alongside each other, it's just the way things are phrased. It does actually make sense. And then, yesterday, helpfully, in the holidays, 2 weeks after we've closed, they decided to release a very large document with information about online educational resources to help children learn from home. And in there they reference the BBC programme of support. Their programmes on the approved list are all offered for free, and there is a legal disclaimer that the government takes no responsibility for the quality of those suggested. The lists are broken into English, Maths, Science, PE, Wellbeing and SEND. I wasn't particularly impressed with the SEND list, feeling that the onus was still therefore left on parents and teachers to make the choices for the child, as opposed to it being an educational app or programme that the child could access and actually use. In fact, their suggested apps and games, they just have 4 of them on there. So they're a great big long list, but we only have 4 that have been identified for SEND. And of course it assumes that families have the access to the technology and the online capabilities. Now, having experienced a system-wide failure of Google services this afternoon, probably unnoticed if you were using a browser, but it definitely slowed down emails and impacted on any of their hosted services, I have concerns that the whole infrastructure of web-based services is possibly about to implode. We have other sources. So as I said at the beginning, I think it's really important that those sources of information that we're using should be reliable sources. And so I'm not going to sit here and give you a list of places to go to where I'm not confident that the information that's being given is correct. So the first one I have for you is the Chartered College. They have what they call the COVID Hub, and that is a dedicated resource hub. It includes a range of resources such as reading lists, compact guides and vlogs, so video logs, and they've published some posts on their Connect blog, which provides a platform to share how you and your school are handling the current challenges. I'll also pop a link down at the bottom of here for the Coronavirus Act, just in case you actually have 2 hours of your life that you just want to lose somewhere in reading it. It is quite interesting, and when you do read it, it actually reads quite scary at points because it is written in such legal language that makes you go, ooh, what? Does it really mean that? But it's worth a read if you really fancy doing something different. However, if you fancy reading something that makes a little bit more sense and is written in everyday language, Hayley Mason of SEN Legal has put it into everyday language over on Special Needs Jungle. And if you've never been to Special Needs Jungle before, take yourself over there. Parents use it all of the time and it's really useful for finding out about SEN type issues. But Hayley has put 4 articles on there specifically related to EHCPs, and she's also published them as an ebook on there as well. We'll put a link to that on the screen or in the description box below so that you can download that. It's a PDF guide and it's entirely free. And Steve Broach, who is also an SEN solicitor, has discussed the direct impact of that coronavirus bill. That page also has links to other sources of information and guidance. Now, I personally had a really interesting conversation with Melinda Nettleton, who is the senior solicitor over at SEN Legal, just as the schools were closing, so that was on the 18th, and I hope to catch up with her soon about anything else that we should be aware of. So what's my takeaway from this? Okay, there are 5 documents or links from this video that I think that every SENCO should be familiar with, and then anything else that's relevant to your specific setting or role. So if you're involved in exams or safeguarding or FE, then you can go and read those ones as well. But as a SENCO, these 5 are the ones that I really think should be in your arsenal. So the school closures one, because it's the overarching document, Hayley's coronavirus SEND law ebook, the document about exceptional funding and keep an eye on any changes in that one. The online resources, because I think you'll find that useful, and the government have said they will update that one regularly, and the guidance on vulnerable pupils, because of course that one will change as time goes by. As usual though, especially in the circumstances we are at the moment, I've got more questions than answers, despite all of the information coming at us. And no, I do not know when schools are going to go back. Take care, guys.